pleasure to be here again after visiting DigiDoc back in 2011. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Actually, it happened to me to say one church. Who knows? Maybe this will convert into a routine. Who knows? But well, generally, what I do is, I make visuals pretty much all my life, and usually they are used to help people sell, usually objects which nobody needs. So, as a sidetrack, I tend to make films that matter, that explore, inspire, and sometimes innovate. And it happened to me back in 2010 to arrive quite accidentally at a place, very beautiful and abandoned temple in Poland, which actually turned out to be a few years long journey, parts of which I'll share with you today. So before I proceed, let me show you a few parts of the projects that we were doing, which are related to point cloud visuals, to photogrammetry, and to visualizing laser scanning data. This is like a sidetrack for a company, because mostly what we do on a daily basis is typical product visualizations and CG. But ever since I got introduced to laser scanning, I had some immense beauty in point clouds and desires to turn it into art, form, and means of expression. And well, that's how it all started. So it started back in 2010 in this beautiful temple where I actually explored the usage of very different techniques that I'm speaking about today, namely motion controlled time-lapse and HDR. So let me show you a little bit of that work, which I had the pleasure of presenting on the last conference. Piece of a film that is like 3 minutes long, and well, this place essentially captivated me. I mean, I got stuck there for a few good years, and the film went quite viral. I mean, it was a beautiful time because it was enough to put beautiful content on Vimeo, and if it was good, it had potential to be noticed, and in this case, this went pretty much viral. This film was watched by over 1 million people quite organically. I mean, there was no marketing behind it, and I was a up-and-coming filmmaker. So quite a bit of luck and coincidence, and I think good arrangement of circumstances. So that's how I got introduced to laser scanning, because I happened to be invited to a conference in Glasgow, and I saw laser scanning, and so I thought, wow, what an amazing technology, and why is nobody making art with it? I mean, it's been used for many years now, but mostly it's used for quite pragmatic reasons. I mean, it's a tool. It's a tool for measuring, for documenting, for reconstructing. But actually, the thing that I remember this moment very well, and this is something that like really struck me very hard, was that it was just beautiful. And I mean, it wasn't beautiful on screen because point clouds were not meant to be beautiful, but I saw a potential there, and that's how I started exploring ways of visualizing point cloud data in a little bit more cinematic way. You know, I come from film background, effect background, so I need things to look good. And at that time, there was not much tools that would allow me to do it. So this project, which followed, which is called Rebirth, actually took me 3 years to complete on and off, but mostly because of the fact that there was no software, no proper workflows, there was no precedence in visualizing laser scanning data in a cinematic way.
As a titan, standing outside of the streams of time. As instantly as light and glory fill my mind, they fade, leaving the dull ache of mortality, the after image of eternity burned into my soul, etched into my dreams. Day and night, I labor feverishly, scrawling every last detail, retracing every immaculate curve, drafting each heaven-bound pillar. Finished. Complete. Escape from the mundane to the sublime. No longer a dream. No longer an impossibility. Transcendency, brilliance, glory, light. Made manifest for all to see. My toil, my oeuvre, my child. Once a bridge to eternity, now a sepulcher, the final resting place of dreams forgotten, of paradise lost.
So, no, I was quite lucky with the chapel because I put like 2 weeks of work into that, and it got viral, and brought me a lot of opportunities. Was able to travel all around the world. People wanted me to shoot more time lapses and stuff like that, and it was a great time. And then I thought, well, so let's make something bigger and better, and that's how I shot Rebirth, which took me 3 years and a hell of a lot of work. And it was much deeper, much more elaborate. It was like 15 minutes long film. You can still watch it in the internet. And guess what? Nobody watched it. I mean, I submitted it to like probably 60 carefully selected festivals. Maybe 3 of them screened that. I think I won like 2 minor festivals with that film. And it was pretty innovative because this is the first film ever made that would use cinematic point cloud visualization directly on the screen, where the point cloud is actually a hero and not a means to capturing something exactly. It was innovative in how, from the narrative and directing standpoint, it mixed different techniques because it consisted of like 3 minutes long visualization of this beautiful building coming together in the mind of an architect who designed it, but then followed with these HDR time-lapse sequences, all the way to this collapse, symbolic collapse that I presented, and finally concluding with a few minutes long sequence of a dance and choreography, which was representing actually the rebirth of the place and the mind of the architect who created this building. So quite a lot of reasons to actually be liked and be noticed, and it didn't happen. But well, apparently there were some other outcomes out of it, which I'll share with you in a second. But first, let me dive a little bit into the process. So I was lucky enough to get to know guys from EKG Baukultur, an Austrian and German company that I got to know on DigiDoc, which offered free scanning. These projects were not commissioned, there was no budget for it, it was all shot from my own pocket. So they were generous enough to donate their time, experience, and equipment to scan it. So we scanned the temple. It took about a day, pretty long one, starting from the early morning all the way to pretty late night. And then the nightmare or the journey started because, generally, if you look at typical point clouds, they look like that. And well, maybe someone likes that, but for me, as a filmmaker, that's definitely not enough. So you need more points, you need better tools to visualize it. I started doing research, there was not much out there. So that took a while to figure out the proper workflow and a way of doing things, mostly trying to get from the situation where you see individual points all the way to a point where you actually see a surface even though there is no surface. Like you have so many points that you see a ghost shell structure, not individual points, which don't behave nicely in film. So it took a while, and actually at the end of the journey, I got pretty far away in terms of getting quite realistic results. What contributed here was a range of different techniques. What we did is, first of all, we used all data that was available. Secondly, the whole data set that has been captured was actually recolored. So what filmmakers normally do during film production as the last stage is color grading, which is like shifting colors of picture on the screen to appeal, and we did it for the 3D data set. To make it a little bit more difficult, part of the data set had color because it was scanned during the day. The other part, actually a major part, did not have color at all. So it took us a little bit of scripting and smart algorithms to cast the color from part of the data set onto the rest. And finally, there was the whole fun part of it, which was designing the intro sequence, which was meant to, again, convey the idea of how a building, how a fantastic piece of architecture is being born in the head of an architect, the mind of an architect. So eventually I settled for quite simple means of expression. I mean, the only thing that is animated here is like cutting through volumes and quite precise camera work, and a little bit of sensibility in terms of visualizing it, lighting it, and color correcting. So what we used here, well, there was a bunch of tools. First of all, as a basic platform, we used Autodesk 3D Max. We also used a lot of custom scripting. The final result was rendered with Thingsbox software Krakatoa, which is normally used by the VFX industry for smoke and particle effects. And with some workarounds, it happened to be usable to render enormous LiDAR scanning data sets in a beautiful way. Rendering wasn't easy also. It took a few good weeks actually to render 2 minutes on a bunch of computers that we had in our studio. But well, finally it finished. But why is this film important? Actually, it's not only about the aesthetics. I like images, I like telling stories through images, but sometimes, I definitely believe that art is a great tool, and it's actually quite underestimated tool for making impact and changing the world around us. And these two films are actually a great example of how independent action, how labor of love from passionate artists can impact the world around. My intention, the first film was thought of as a kind of a testament for the building that I was seeing as decaying, and it was pretty sure that it would fall apart in a matter of years. When I started working on Rebirth, I thought, okay, let's play this game and imagine what happens if it was restored, or at least if it was restored or preserved in symbolic dimension. And actually, which it wasn't my intention, but it happened that all these films, thanks to the internet, were so inspiring that some media got interested, people got interested, some enthusiasts got interested, started the foundation, gathered the money, and actually started renovation of the building. So the state today is pretty far from what we see on the pictures from 2010. Today the dome is renovated, the roof is fully repaired, the construction is redone. There is a new dome, and it's safe. It will not fall apart in the next 2 years. Moreover, it's starting to have a new function. The great thing about it is that, the curse of this church is that it's a Protestant church, and Poland is a Catholic country, and after the war, the fate of this church wasn't pretty lucky. So, it was a shed for sheep, and served many different, not necessarily honorable purposes. But ultimately, it's meant, these days, it's meant to be repurposed for holding, cultural events. There were music videos shot there. There were performances. There were concerts. So it's already happening. And well, from my standpoint, that's probably the best possible reward I could imagine as a filmmaker. So 7 years long project with great results. Moving on to some other projects, we started using point cloud data visualization commercially. I'll show you a little example of how we merged LiDAR data visualization to create environments for a film. This is a small commercial production to showcase the venue for art that was transformed. So that was a quick project. It took us about a month to complete, from starting the idea through the scanning all the way to like delivering the final. I wish it could have got bigger budget and more time, but well, we always work under constraints. But I think it's a great opportunity to like merge different technologies together. And the way we executed this, it was that the venue was scanned actually before the renovation started. After demolishing the roofs and levels. And then we shot the entire film part on green screen, tracked the camera that's a pretty normal process for typical VFX work, and then camera matched the movements to the point cloud and rendered the environment matching canvas. So it was a fun project. There is another one I'd like to mention. It's more kind of a project where we use photogrammetry as in a more pragmatic way. Actually, the story of this project is that I visited another abandoned palace this time, shooting for another short film of mine, but the place was amazing, and I took some extra footage and took some photographs, and all of a sudden it turned out that we could produce some music videos for LA-based artists over there using the footage that was shot for different purposes. So it's a project where we actually used photogrammetry reconstruction of one of the interiors based on video footage to create quite seamless integration of CG elements with the real environment. Because normally when you integrate CG with real world footage, you need to mesh lighting. And in order to mesh lighting, you usually would shoot HDR domes in location used to light the CG part. In this case, there were like so many rooms in this palace that I couldn't take HDRs of everything, and apparently, ultimately we decided to use footage of the room that I didn't have HDRs for this music video, and there was a need to actually recreate HDR domes for lighting the CG part. So that's where photogrammetry actually helped us reconstruct the environment to help create reflections and proper lighting for the CG part. I'm not going to show this video, it's just worth mentioning, but I'll show a little bit of how the palace looks. It's quite amazing. So the process involved reconstructing the selected rooms, one where the stack of TVs is rendered, the second one where this generative fractal form is rendered. We reconstructed them based on video footage, modeled a little bit in case of the first room, just to project texture and have an environment for integrating the CG. But actually the real reason for me visiting that place was to shoot another film, and my major part of this project is actually reconstructing the entire palace. So what we did there is, and you could see that on the reel on the beginning, like the large palace that was featured. We did quite a large scan using terrestrial photogrammetry and also using drones. A few thousand pictures. We have an external scan, we have several interiors, and they will be used in the film that I'm currently working on. Again, first of all, to put this palace in a totally new context, so a little bit more filmic one, and secondly, to actually digitally renovate for the purpose of the film one of the major or most impressive rooms. Essentially, as you saw, the entire setting, like environment around this palace, is not very appealing. So that's why we decided to scan the entire building. We'll put it into a totally new context. There will be a beautiful, quite dangerous hill. It will be sitting on top of that hill. So fully recreated CG environment featuring the originally scanned building, and also part of the story is that as one of the protagonists dances in one of the most beautiful rooms in this palace, it will be like digitally renovated, and we'll see a transition from the current state all the way to the place as it could look like during its most magnificent years. So that's where we actually needed the photogrammetry for, but that's more on the side of like using photogrammetry in a little bit more typical scenario where you use it as a tool to facilitate some other actions. So both films, if you like to watch them, they are available on the internet. If you Google for The Chapel and Rebirth, you'll easily find it. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about our company and what we're doing commercially, feel free to visit kizny.com. And well, the new film is probably coming